In Almaty, a bustling city where life moves at a frantic pace, a wedding was about to take place, a celebration that promised to be the event of the season. Layla and Timur were the couple everyone admired, with friends and acquaintances praising their seemingly perfect relationship. The day was the culmination of months of planning and anticipation, but no one attending had any idea that this wedding would soon turn into a tragic story. Layla was born in 1990 into a middle-class family where her parents were strict about her upbringing and education. From a young age, she was accustomed to order and discipline, which helped her grow into a responsible and goal-oriented person. After completing her studies in finance, she secured a job at one of the city's major banks. Her life was meticulously planned. She always knew what she wanted to achieve and how to get there. On the outside, she appeared beautiful, successful, and independent. But inside, she was someone who had learned to hide her fears and insecurities behind a mask of confidence. Timur, who was the same age as Layla, had a different upbringing. He was raised in a well-to-do family. His father was an influential businessman, and his mother was active in philanthropy. After finishing his education in London, Timur returned to Kazakhstan and immediately got involved in the family business. He was successful, charismatic, and quickly became a popular figure in Almaty's business circles. His confidence sometimes bordered on arrogance, a trait that might have set the stage for what was to come. Their meeting was unplanned but seemed almost destined. One evening, after a long day at work, Layla decided to meet up with friends at a small cafe in the city center. Timur happened to be there with mutual acquaintances, and, as often happens in such settings, they exchanged glances. There was nothing at that moment to suggest that this encounter would lead to something much bigger. A few days later, with the help of friends, Timur found Layla's phone number and called her. And so, their story began. From the very start, Timur was persistent, never letting Layla out of his sight. She, accustomed to independence and self-reliance, was initially cautious, but soon allowed herself to relax. She was drawn to his confidence, his drive, and the way he seemed willing to do anything for their future. 6 months into their relationship, Timur proposed, and Layla said yes, even though deep down, there were still doubts she tried to suppress. And so, in 2017, the wedding was being planned on a grand scale, set to be the start of Layla and Timur's perfect life together. Layla was deeply involved in all the wedding preparations, not paying attention to the small signs that were becoming more noticeable by the day. Timur started spending more time away from home, often citing business meetings or gatherings with partners. Layla noticed, but she brushed it off as him just being busy. Sometimes she felt he was becoming distant, but she didn't want to ruin the idea of the perfect wedding and their happy future. Ada, Layla's best friend since childhood, was also actively involved in the wedding planning. Their friendship was strong. They had known each other since kindergarten, shared all their joys and sorrows, and always had each other's backs. Ida was someone Layla could confide in, sharing her deepest thoughts. Unlike Layla, Ida was more free-spirited. She wasn't tied down by a career, lived in the moment, and often changed her interests. Perhaps it was this difference that made their bond so strong. They balanced each other out. When the wedding day finally arrived, Layla woke up with an inexplicable sense of unease. She couldn't shake off the memory of a strange phone conversation she had accidentally overheard a few days earlier. At the time, she had thought it was just a routine business call for Timur, but deep down, something clicked. The vague feeling of anxiety grew, but there was no time to dwell on it amidst the wedding chaos. As usual, she pushed her thoughts aside and focused on the ceremony, telling herself everything else could wait. The ceremony began on time, and everything was going according to plan. Layla, dressed in a stunning white gown, stood beside Timur, listening to the congratulations and toasts. Timur looked perfect, as always. He was the center of attention, and his charm seemed to captivate everyone around him. Yet Layla couldn't help but notice his glances towards Aida. They were subtle, unnoticed by most of the guests, but not by her. Instinctively, Layla felt something was wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on it. As the reception progressed, Layla felt even more disconnected. She watched Timur as he periodically slipped out of the room, either to take phone calls or just to step away from the noisy celebration. Each time he returned, his expression shifted from cheerful to tense. At one point, Layla noticed Timur stepping out again, and this time her patience ran out. She got up from the table and followed him, moving through the long hallways of the banquet venue. Behind the columns and walls, her heart was pounding faster than ever. She approached the door and heard Timur's hushed voice. She couldn't catch every word, but she didn't need to. He was talking to someone, and his tone was far from businesslike. Layla understood everything she needed to in that moment. It was as if a line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Something inside her shifted. As she made her way back to the hall, she was no longer the same Layla who had woken up that morning. Her thoughts were cold and distant. She knew that her old life was over, and everything would be different now. The guests continued to enjoy themselves, unaware of the shadow that was beginning to loom. It turned out that Timur had been exchanging texts and calls with Aida, who had also been disappearing frequently to the restroom throughout the evening. When Timur returned, he didn't notice that anything had changed. He looked at Layla with a slight smile, trying to mask his nervousness, but his eyes betrayed his tension. Layla met his gaze and slowly walked towards him. Their eyes locked, but at that moment, there were no longer any of the emotions that had once connected them. Everything had shattered. The guests, still in the midst of the celebration, had no idea what was unfolding behind their backs. The festive music drowned out the tense silence that hung between Layla and Timur. They stood close, yet felt miles apart. Layla continued to play her role as the perfect bride, but inside, everything had changed. Now she was simply waiting for what she knew was about to happen. Timur noticed the change in Layla's behavior, but preoccupied with his own thoughts and constant phone calls, he chalked it up to exhaustion or pre-wedding jitters. Confident and self-assured, he didn't realize that every misstep, every word, every gesture was already forming a final picture that would soon be revealed to everyone. Meanwhile, Layla couldn't take her eyes off him, sinking deeper into her thoughts about how everything had changed in just a few hours. How could they, the people she trusted most, especially on this important day, betray her so cruelly? She continued to watch Timur, but in her mind, he was already a stranger. Her heart clenched with every move he made. Yet she maintained a cold expression, hiding the storm that was tearing her apart inside. Timur had always been by Layla's side, always supporting her. But lately, something had changed between them. At first, it was small things, occasional late nights at work, strange phone calls late in the evening. But Layla always found excuses for them. She wanted to believe that these were just temporary issues, that after the wedding, their relationship would go back to what it used to be, and they would be happy together again. But now she realized she had been blind. Her best friend Ada, who had always been there for her, whom she considered her closest and most loyal confidant, suddenly felt like a stranger. Every time Layla thought about Aida's support and involvement in the wedding preparations, it made her feel sick. How long had this been going on? How long had they been hiding their connection? She couldn't trust anyone anymore. After a brief but tense moment, Timur disappeared again. Layla saw him quickly slip out through a side exit. She already knew who he was talking to and what was happening behind her back. At that moment, she felt she couldn't endure it any longer. Her heart was already drained, and her mind was cold. She had made up her mind. Layla headed towards the back hallways, away from the guests. She walked quickly, without hesitation, following only the inner impulse that pushed her forward. Beyond the long, empty corridors was the service room where Timur had gone. Layla knew that this was the moment when she needed to see everything with her own eyes. Standing at the door, Layla paused. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate. She simply grabbed the handle and opened the door. Inside, it was silent, and Timur was standing by the window, talking on the phone. His voice was low, but Layla heard every word. "Why did you leave so early, babe?" "Just hold on for one night. I'll be yours again tomorrow." He was talking to Ada, and there was no longer any doubt in his words. This wasn't something new. It had been going on for a while, hiding behind her back, deceiving her. When Layla stepped into the room, Timur turned sharply, but he didn't manage to hide his phone. In that moment, everything became clear. Layla stood in the doorway, looking at the man she had once loved. There was no pain or regret left in her eyes. All she felt was a cold calm. She knew this was the end, and it had to end this way. But Layla didn't say a word. She turned around and walked out, leaving Timur in that room. She no longer had plans for the future. Her thoughts were not about tomorrow. Every action she took now was focused on one thing: bringing this story to its conclusion. When she returned to the guests, the festive atmosphere was still in full swing. People were laughing, drinking, dancing. No one had any idea that a dark cloud had already settled over the celebration. Layla once again put on the mask of the perfect bride, smiling, appearing happy. But inside, there was chaos. Now her plan was clear and precise. Gradually, the guests began to leave the banquet hall as the evening wore on and fatigue set in. The celebration was winding down, and the night was slowly coming to an end. Layla, calm and composed, stood by the exit, bidding everyone farewell with polite smiles. Everything was going according to plan, and no one had any idea what she had in mind. When the hall was nearly empty, Layla returned to the center of the room and looked around. Only the closest friends remained, those who wanted to stay with her until the very end. She clenched her fists to hide her inner tension, but outwardly, she remained cool and collected. Her goal was clear. Timur walked up to Layla, wrapped his arm around her waist, and suggested they leave. At that moment, any doubts she had vanished. Layla turned to him and nodded. Her eyes were empty, but Timur didn't notice. He was confident that everything was under control, that this wedding was just a formality before his own plans would take over. They left the hall together. Layla walked alongside Timur, her heart beating slower, as if preparing for something inevitable. They headed to the car, and in that moment, everything Layla had been holding inside for months began to surface. She knew there was no turning back, and that everything from this point on would unfold according to the plan she had carefully crafted. Layla coldly ordered Timur to get in the car. There were no extra words, no explanations. Her voice was devoid of emotion, just a firm command that he obeyed, still not fully understanding what was happening. His eyes darted across her face, searching for any hint of emotion, but Layla was like a steel wall, impenetrable, unmoving, indifferent. As Timur started the car, Layla gave him an address in a steady voice. Ada's apartment. He froze for a moment, looking at her in surprise, but then pressed the gas pedal and drove toward Layla's friend's home. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Layla stared out the window, her heartbeat steady, her mind focused on a single objective. Timur sensed the tension in the air, but didn't grasp just how serious it was. When they arrived at Aida's building, Layla opened the car door and got out quickly, not waiting for Timur. He followed her, slightly confused, still trying to piece together what was going on. Layla walked confidently up to the apartment door. Ada wasn't home yet. Maybe she had gone somewhere after the party. Layla bent down and retrieved a familiar set of keys from under the doormat. Those keys had always been there, ever since their friendship began. Back then, it was a symbol of their closeness and trust. But now, the gesture had taken on a completely different meaning. Layla silently unlocked the door and stepped inside, still holding the keys in her hand. Timur followed her, realizing that the situation was slipping out of his control. The apartment was quiet, with only faint streetlights filtering through the curtains, casting shadows on the walls. Layla walked straight to the kitchen, opened one of the drawers, and pulled out a large kitchen knife. The metal glinted in the light. Timur froze, understanding that she was about to do something drastic, but still not fully grasping how far things would go. He took a step toward her, trying to say something, but Layla stopped him with a look that spoke louder than any words. Her hand gripped the knife firmly, as if she had made this decision long ago. "Sit down and wait," she ordered, pointing to a chair. Timur obeyed, the fear in his eyes beginning to replace his earlier confidence. He sat down, tense and unsure of what to expect. Time seemed to crawl by until the door opened and Aida walked in. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Layla and Timur. Her eyes darted between them, trying to make sense of the scene. She took a step forward, but Layla was ready for this moment. "Your turn," Layla said calmly, pointing the knife toward Aida. Aida stepped back, her face twisting in terror. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Layla was unmoved. She pointed to the chair opposite Timur, and Aida, shaken, complied. Layla paused before she began speaking. Her voice was steady and cold, as if she were conducting a business meeting, not preparing for an act of violence. "You both knew this would come out eventually. I want to know how long it's been going on. I want the truth," Layla said, her gaze shifting between Timur and Aida. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Layla realized they both understood there was no way back. There was silence at first. Then Timur began to speak. He tried to explain, but his voice was shaky. Layla listened in silence, her expression unchanged. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't need any explanations. When Layla felt she had heard enough, she silently moved closer to Timur. Her movements were swift and decisive. Without hesitation, she raised the knife and struck him directly in the chest. Timur screamed, but Layla didn't stop. Her face remained as cold as her actions. She then quickly turned to Aida, who was sitting on the chair, paralyzed with terror. Layla didn't say a word. She stepped forward and, with the same cold precision, struck Aida with the knife. Aida's screams were cut short as Layla continued, her actions just as methodical as before. After both were lifeless, Layla began to methodically dismember their bodies. The silence in Aida's apartment was broken only by the sound of her work with the knife. Layla stood over the bodies of Timur and Aida, her hands already stained with blood, but her expression was still cold and detached. There was no sign of fear, horror, or regret on her face. She acted methodically, as if everything was pre-planned. Layla knew this wasn't enough. This was just the beginning. The act didn't complete her plan. She needed to see it through to the end. She crouched down next to Timur's body, his arms outstretched as if he had tried to defend himself from the knife. Layla looked at him coldly, remembering how not long ago she had loved this man. Now there was nothing left of that love, only hatred that drove her forward. Slowly, she leaned down and grabbed his hand. Her muscles tensed as she began to cut off his hand. The knife struggled to slice through, but Layla was relentless. To her, this was no longer a person but an object that needed to be destroyed. Layla then moved on to the rest of the limbs. Each motion was slow and steady. Her hands moved mechanically, without hesitation. Blood pooled on the floor around the bodies, but Layla remained focused on her task. She didn't stop until she had severed all of Timur's limbs. Once she was done with Timur, Layla stood up and walked over to Aida's body. There was no anger or pain, just emptiness. She had ended the life of her best friend without hesitation, and now it was time to finish what she had started. Layla picked up the knife again and resumed her grim task. She dismembered Aida's body with the same methodical precision she had used on Timur. Layla paid no attention to the red stains covering her hands, face, and clothes. She acted like a surgeon, cutting apart the body and carefully placing the pieces into bags she had found earlier in the apartment. Each severed piece went into a bag, and it had become a mechanical routine for her. When she finished, Layla sat down on a chair, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes for a moment. Now she had to figure out what to do next with the bodies. Leaving them there wasn't an option. She knew she had to erase all traces, to eliminate any chance of her crime being uncovered. A plan began to form quickly in her mind. The first thing she did was change into clean clothes from Aida's closet. Then, she took the bags with the body parts and moved them to the bathroom. She knew she had to get rid of the remains, but she wasn't in a rush. Every move was deliberate and calculated. She searched the apartment and found large trash bags stored on the balcony. Her plan was to use those bags to dispose of the remains, but it required time and extreme caution. Layla pulled out the bags and began placing the body parts inside. She carefully wrapped each limb, each piece, ensuring that nothing was left exposed. Once the bags were filled, Layla paused for a moment. Her mind stirred from its detached state. She realized what she had done, but there was no going back now. Next, she had to move the bags out of the apartment. She knew it wouldn't be easy to do it without drawing attention. Layla meticulously planned her actions. She would take the bags out in small batches to avoid alerting the neighbors. Aida had an old trash cart on the balcony, which Layla found and used. She loaded it up with the first set of bags and began moving them downstairs. Every time she stepped into the hallway, Layla moved quietly and cautiously. She slowly wheeled the cart down the corridor, making sure not to make any unnecessary noise. The elevator was nearby, making the task easier. Layla took it down to the first floor, slipped out through the back exit, and loaded the bags into the trunk of Timur's car. Then she returned for the second batch and repeated the process. Once all the bags with the bodies were loaded into the car, Layla got behind the wheel. She slowly started the engine, her hands trembling, but she forced herself to stay focused. She needed to find a place where she could dispose of the remains without leaving a trace. She drove out of the city, heading to a remote area where people rarely ventured, a spot where she could cover up the evidence of her crime. Layla chose an abandoned patch of land, a place that was rarely visited. She got out of the car and began unloading the bags. Slowly and without emotion, she laid them out in the woods, trying to position them in a way that no one would stumble upon them accidentally. When the last bag was hidden in the bushes, Layla drove back to Aida's apartment to clean up more thoroughly and erase any signs of what had happened there. By the time Layla left Aida's apartment, it was almost 5 in the morning. The streets of Almaty were still mostly empty, the city just beginning to wake up. She knew she was running out of time. Her thoughts were focused on one thing: leaving the country as soon as possible. She understood that the absence of Timur and Aida would soon be noticed. Her only hope was to disappear before the police started asking questions. On the way home, Layla felt an inner tension, but her mind remained cold and clear. She returned to her place, quickly took a shower, washing off the blood and dirt. Then, she gathered what she needed: her passport, money, a few documents. The plan was simple: leave the country on the first available flight. She used her phone to find the nearest international flight. Fortunately, there was a flight to Moscow departing at 10 a.m., and that was her chance. She had to get to the airport as quickly as possible. Without wasting any time, Layla left her apartment, leaving behind anything that could draw attention to her. She knew it would be impossible to completely erase the traces left in Aida's place, but she hoped to buy herself enough time before anyone realized something was wrong. No one had heard screams that night. She had acted quietly and efficiently. To those around them, Aida and Timur's sudden disappearance wouldn't immediately raise alarms. If she could get out of the country, her chances of avoiding justice would be much higher. Arriving at the airport around 8 in the morning, Layla parked the car far from the main entrances and headed toward the terminal. She purposely chose clothing that wouldn't attract attention: dark sunglasses, a scarf, and a simple coat. Despite the tension inside, on the outside she appeared calm and composed. Her ticket was electronic, making the check-in process smoother. No questions, no suspicions. So far, everything was going according to plan. However, while Layla was waiting to board her flight, she sensed that something was off. She couldn't quite explain what alerted her, but her instincts told her that things might not go as planned. To be safe, she decided to change her ticket to a different flight. Instead of flying to Moscow as she originally intended, she bought a ticket for a flight to Istanbul, which was scheduled to depart a bit later, around noon. This gave her more time to prepare and a chance to change direction if the situation got more complicated. Layla spent the next few hours in the airport waiting area, trying to stay inconspicuous. She kept an eye on the news on her phone, but there was nothing suspicious yet. It felt like everything was under control. At the same time, her phone was buzzing with calls and texts from concerned friends and family members. But by then, signs of her crime were already raising questions. Around 10 a.m., Timur's absence was noticed at work when he failed to show up for important meetings he was scheduled to attend right after the wedding. At first, his colleagues were merely puzzled, but when neither calls nor messages were answered, concern started to grow. Around the same time, Aida's neighbors began noticing strange things. Some had heard noises late at night but didn't think much of it. However, when Aida didn't answer her door despite repeated knocks, it became a cause for concern. One of the neighbors called the police around noon, reporting unusual activity at Aida's apartment. Police arrived at the scene around 1 p.m. and found the apartment empty. But the bloodstains on the floor and other surfaces immediately indicated that something terrible had happened. Within a few hours, investigators began piecing together the details. They quickly discovered that Layla was connected to both Timur and Aida. Friends and family who were questioned mentioned the wedding, after which none of them had seen Timur, Aida, or Layla. By evening, the police had started searching for Layla. A task force reached out to airports, and by around 6 p.m., they received information that she had been spotted at Almaty International Airport. Unaware that she was already being tracked, Layla calmly waited to board her flight to Istanbul, which had been delayed. She was beginning to regret not taking the direct flight to Moscow, opting instead for a more complex escape route. She felt exhausted and emotionally drained, but thought she had managed to evade the inevitable consequences. However, as her flight was finally announced, 2 men in plain clothes approached her. They showed their badges and asked her to come with them. Layla realized her plan had fallen apart. The police had moved faster than she had anticipated. She was apprehended right in the airport's waiting area, and there were no attempts to escape, no excuses. She simply followed the officers in silence, understanding that the end had come. After her arrest, Layla was taken to a police station in Almaty for questioning. She remained silent throughout the drive, knowing that her attempts to evade justice had failed. The police already had enough evidence, clues that linked her to the crimes. But even in the interrogation room, sitting across from the investigator at a cold metal table, she refused to speak, despite their efforts to make her talk. The confession didn't come immediately. For several hours, Layla resisted answering any questions, her face unreadable, as if she was still holding out hope for a miracle. But when they showed her the crime scene photos, bloody traces, the dismembered bodies of Timur and Aida, neatly packed bags containing their remains, Layla understood there was no point in denying it any longer. She exhaled and finally broke down. Her confession was cold and precise. Layla recounted everything, from the moment she discovered the affair to the night of the crime. Her voice was calm, devoid of any emotional inflection. She described how she planned it all from the moment she uncovered Timur and Aida's betrayal. She explained how she acted in the apartment, how she forced them to confess, and then methodically ended their lives, dismembering their bodies to cover her tracks. She spoke as if it was a ritual that needed to be completed, and she was stunned that the police had found the bodies so quickly, not realizing that her entire journey, transporting Aida and Timur's remains to the woods, had been captured on surveillance cameras. When the interrogation was over, the investigators were shocked by her lack of emotion. Layla showed no hint of remorse or regret. To her, everything that had happened was inevitable. Her confession became a crucial key to closing the case. The trial began a few months later. The case garnered significant media attention in Kazakhstan, and the courtroom was packed not only with friends and family of Timur and Aida, but also with curious onlookers. The case drew widespread coverage, and the public was stunned by the brutality and cold-blooded nature of Layla's actions. No one could believe that this woman, who appeared so calm and composed, could commit such a heinous act. Yet there were those who sympathized with Layla, genuinely moved by her story and claiming that such betrayal should not have gone unpunished. During the trial, Layla remained as composed as she had been during the interrogations. She did not deny her guilt, nor did she try to make excuses. Her attorney attempted to argue that she had been under severe emotional distress caused by the infidelity and betrayal of those closest to her. But this did little to soften her image in the eyes of the public. Her cold demeanor unnerved everyone who followed the trial. The testimonies from friends and family only added to the atmosphere of horror surrounding the case. The motive of betrayal was clear, but the brutality of her actions went beyond comprehension. The judge listened to both sides, but the trial felt more like a formality. Everyone knew that Layla would be found guilty. After several weeks of proceedings, the verdict was delivered. Layla was found guilty of committing a double homicide with extreme cruelty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Layla stared straight ahead with the same calm, indifferent expression on her face. She didn't flinch, didn't say a word. It was as if she accepted everything without question. Once the sentence was announced, she was escorted out of the courtroom under strict security. The entire process ended just as it had begun, cold and emotionless. Layla was taken to prison, where she would spend the rest of her life in isolation, far from those she once knew. Layla's story quickly faded from the headlines, overshadowed by new events, but her case remained a stark reminder of how betrayal can lead to the most tragic outcomes.